afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you so much to NICE for inviting me to be here today. I apologise, my Norwegian is not up to scratch. Maybe next year I'll be fluent, but yeah, for now you'll have to deal with my English, I'm afraid. But I've been very kindly offered some translation if there are any questions in Norwegian at the end of the presentation. So I'm the fisheries manager for Lloyd's Register. We were previously known as Akura, if anybody has heard of them, and we were bought by Lloyd's Register a couple of years ago now. I started work there in 2015, and I mainly deal with the Marine Stewardship Council Fisheries Scheme and the Responsible Fishing Scheme, which is a social auditing of fishing vessels that is currently just in the UK but is about to go worldwide next year. So Lloyd's Register, you might have heard of through their work with the marine industry in terms of shipping and marine vessels registration. So Lloyd's Register was founded back in 1760 and we're recognised for being independent and specialists in all technical fields that we cover. The seafood business, which covers both fisheries and aquaculture, comes under the customised assurance branch of Lloyd's Register. Besides the seafood business, we deal with a number of different accreditation schemes. So we work not just in fisheries, but in aquaculture and agriculture on land. So this is just a small selection of the portfolio of food certification services that we offer as a business. We're the leading provider of MSc assessments across the world with around 40% of the market share. We offer the only social auditing scheme for fishing vessels. We have over 100 different species that are assessed across the world and 40 plus countries worldwide that deliver our audits. We also have around 30 plus years of experience and we're the only assessment body that offer assured salmon and trout audits in the United Kingdom. So this is where the location of all our fisheries that are assessed by us for the Marine Stewardship Council across the world. As you can see, we've got a massive coverage with fisheries on every single continent, which for me is really interesting because I get to look at all the different fisheries in very different situations, very different types of fisheries, and that means it's always interesting and always diverse. We do a lot of work in the Northeast Atlantic region. As you can see, that's probably our busiest and biggest area, right up into the Barents Sea. We actually have a couple of representations of fisheries that we work with here, so polar seafood we work with, and Fian as well, who presented earlier. So the MSc standard is based on the assessment of 3 different principles. Principle 1 is the assessment of the stock. So is there enough fish being left over to ensure that the fish can continue to populate and be sustainable for future generations? Principle 2 is the impact on the ecosystem. How many fisheries that aren't your target stock are you catching? What impact are you having on the seabed? All of these things are considered under Principle 2. And Principle 3 is the effective management of the whole thing. Does management respond when something goes wrong? If the stock was to collapse, what would they do to fix the problem? All of that is covered under MSc. So for each of the principles, we have 28 performance indicators. Those are what we score against, and they get very specific. I'm not going to go right into the detail, but I'd be happy to talk to anyone afterwards if they want to know more. So as you can see, for Principle 1, we have the outcome, which is how well the stock is doing. And then we have harvest strategy. So what measures are in place to make sure the stock is continued to be harvested at a sustainable level? For Principle 2, they're split into 5 different components. When we're given the catch data for a fishery, we assign all of the species into different categories. A primary species would be a bycatch species that has stock reference points. So for example, if you were a cod fisherman and you wanted MSc certification for your cod, but you were also catching haddock, we would class that as a primary species because haddock is likely to have a stock assessment and therefore reference points. A secondary species is a species that does not have a reference point. So it could be something that you catch very rarely and that science hasn't designated reference points for that stock yet. ETP species is endangered, threatened and protected species. So that would be anything that was listed as ETP by national legislation or is on the red list from IUCN. Anything of that kind would be under ETP. and they are treated even more precautionarily than other things within Principle 2 to ensure that their endangered status is considered properly under the MSC standard. Habitats is the impact on the seabed, or if you're not in contact with the seabed, if it's pelagic fishery, then any habitats that might be interacted with, so that would be the kind of pelagic environment. And then ecosystem is the impact as a whole on the entire ecosystem, which hasn't been considered elsewhere. So through all of that, we give a really good look at how the fishery is operating and the impacts on everything that it could. Principle 3 is the management. So we look at the governance and the policy that covers the fishery, and the fishery management system. So that can be the specific thing that the client has in place or that government has in place to ensure the fishery is well managed. So for a fishery to pass an MSC assessment, there's a number of things it has to achieve. So first of all, for every single 28 performance indicators, the fishery must at least score a 60. If it scores between 60 and 80, it is given something called a condition. This condition ensures continual improvement throughout the life of its 5-year certificate. If the PI scores over 80, it is an unconditional pass. As well as these requirements, the overall score added up for each principle, so 1, 2, and 3, must be over 80 overall for it to pass. So it's quite a high level for the fishery to achieve, but that's to ensure that every fishery that is passing the assessment and gets the eco label is really sustainable and deserves that label. So in February 2018, a new process for the MSC was released, which changed the order of things around slightly, meaning it was a much more stakeholder welcome process. So by stakeholder, I mean anybody involved in a fishery, basically. So now a report is produced by the assessment team up front, and that is published on the MSC website, and they have the opportunity to look through that and comment on it and provide us with evidence. The assessment team, which my team organise and choose, they then go on site and meet with fishermen, with science, with anyone else that wants to meet with them to discuss what's been presented, and the process continues from there. Engagement with local people around the fishery is really important and happens at multiple stages. NGOs such as WWF can also get involved. So I'm going to talk about the kind of 3 different areas that can drive the MSC process. So first of all, the MSC can be driven by markets, and this is what they coin their theory of change. So just to explain a little bit further, consumers really know what they want. So the latest MSC survey showed that 84% of seafood consumers agree that we need to protect seafood supplies for future generations. That's a really strong statistic and shows that people are really, really passionate about doing so. 72% of seafood consumers agreed that in order to save the oceans, shoppers must only choose seafood from sustainable sources. And the MSC Eco Label is a really key part of that, as it shows to a consumer this product is sustainable. So the MSC label is really a consumer tool. The consumer prefers MSC certified seafood, and then there is an increased demand for MSC food as that is shown in the markets. More MSC fisheries enter assessment as they respond to that. Non-certified fisheries recognise that things are changing and they need to keep up, and then there are more MSC products in store, and then that feeds back to people choosing MSC more regularly, and we get this positive feedback. As a result, the MSC label can really drive sustainability in fisheries. As they enter assessment with MSC, conditions on the fishery require constant improvement. Non-certified fisheries, again, recognise that things are moving around them, other people are making improvements and entering the MSC. They have to make up for these improvements and improve themselves, and then they get to a position where they themselves can enter MSC programme. This is really exciting and a really easy and positive way for consumers to work with fishermen to be able to make those improvements and drive that kind of change. And this is a real reflection of the work that I've seen over the last 4 years since I've started in MSC work. A lot of the straightforward, as it were, fisheries have already gone through MSC assessment, and they've been in the programme for a number of years. But we're increasingly seeing fisheries that previously wouldn't have been up to the standard entering the MSC programme. Even if a fishery hasn't been able to enter public assessment with the MSC, they can enter something called a fishery improvement project. This is where they work with funders or with other people involved in the fishery to make the changes required to advance their fishery, make improvements, and then ultimately aim for MSC certification and use of the eco-label at the end of the process. The scale of the fisheries is also growing, so we're going from a few vessels within a very small client group to massive organisations putting in multiple vessels across multiple oceans, and that's really exciting to see as well. Other fisheries previously not involved are continuing to do so, which is great. The MSC process is also driven by science, and quantitative information from data and science is very important. It's constantly used to inform the setting of the MSC standard, so every 5 years the MSC standard is reviewed, and they use the latest science and quantitative data to feed into that. As a conformity assessment body, which is what Lloyd's Register is known as, we are constantly using science and quantitative data to inform our MSC assessments, so it's key to what we're being able to do. The MSC also supports scientific research, so they'll fund or promote science that really helps to advance in sustainable fisheries. However, there are challenges with using quantitative scientific data. For example, not all fisheries have quantitative data, particularly in the developing world. We might not have the kind of science and regulations that we see in the North Atlantic. And also the other thing that is becoming of increasing awareness is that scientific evidence is not always agreed with stakeholders, with fishermen. As pointed out in the last presentation, it was told that it wasn't possible to catch mackerel in 1 degree C, but they did. So there's a disagreement there, and that needs to be addressed. So the MSC process is also driven by stakeholders. So as I said, what do I mean by a stakeholder? The MSC definition is any person or group, including government and non-government institutions, communities, universities, research institutions, development agencies, etc. I'm not going to go down the list, with an interest or claim which has the potential being impacted or having an impact on a given project and its objectives. So basically, it's anybody that wants to get involved with an MSC assessment can, and I think that's really important to remember. No matter who you are and whatever you have to say, we want to know about it and we want to hear it. So the MSC is built upon a foundation of being transparent and inclusive. Everything is public, it's all available on the MSC website, anybody can access that information at any stage. The stakeholders have the opportunity to participate throughout the process, and we really encourage it. Without it, it's very hard for us to do our jobs properly. We can meet the team, the stakeholders in person, or we can ask them to contribute remotely through submission of comments or by conference call. They often offer a crucial insight not available anywhere else. They can give real perspective to data that we wouldn't have without their input. A meeting with fishermen and skippers is not always possible. It can't always be arranged. People are often out fishing, which is what they're meant to be doing, but it's really, really important that we do speak to them because they're the ones going out and seeing what's happening on the ground every single day. So when we have a situation where there isn't quantitative data available, the MSC have a specific process for that. It's called the Risk-Based Framework, or RBF. This uses stakeholder input into MSC assessments to gain information and knowledge on species and their attributes. The stakeholder information is used to form scores that are then translated into MSC scores. They're only appropriate for 4 specific principal indicators, and those are principal stock assessment. So if we don't have specific reference points for a stock, we use people's input to find out how the stock is doing. For bycatch species, so other species that are caught that are not your target species. For the ecosystem impacts and for habitat impacts. And stakeholders can help us to identify where there might be coral reefs, for example, or areas of vulnerable habitat that we wouldn't previously know about without their knowledge. There are 4 methods used. I'm not going to go into detail again, but there are consequence analysis, productivity susceptibility analysis, consequence spatial analysis, and scale intensity consequence analysis. And we use those for different areas within the MSC programme, and including stakeholder knowledge, to create these MSC scores. So yeah, these are the key areas highlighted in yellow that we can use the RBF for. But is the RBF enough in terms of the knowledge that stakeholders can bring to an MSC assessment? Recent experiences have shown, particularly in the Northeast Atlantic, that a stakeholder's view of what is going on can be very different to that of the science. Procedurally, as a CAB, as Lloyd's Register, we have to follow the science if it is available. So when we have quantitative information, we always have to use that rather than use the risk-based framework. And that means that when we're getting told very different information from what the science says, it's very hard for us to use that, which can be very frustrating for us as an assessment body. So the key question that I want to ask of the MSc is there a way that we can incorporate local knowledge even when we have scientific information to back it up? So a key part to this is to encourage people to get involved with the latest MSc standard review. So this is your chance, if you feel that there is a better way to incorporate local knowledge, that we participate in the standard review and you tell the MSc this. So I can provide this link to anybody that needs it afterwards, but the standard review is ongoing at the moment and they're looking for evidence and information about what should be included in the next standard to ensure it is fully assessing sustainable fisheries adequately. So in conclusion, the reality is that the MSc process is driven by all three, by market, science and stakeholders. Without the market demand, the MSc would not be the well-recognised eco-label that it is today. And the market-driven means that fisheries have to make improvements and continue to do so, and other fisheries around it do the same. But the scientific evidence and quantitative information is really key for determining outcomes of an MSc assessment. And knowledge from stakeholders is a key source of information about the fishery that we're assessing. So thank you very much for listening. I'd welcome any questions. Tack.